Spider-Man Hostile Takeover. Chapter 20. The cup of coffee in his hand was cold, and Peter carried it to the microwave to reheat it for the third time, maybe the fourth. He stepped over piles of clothes, stacks of books, discarded computer equipment. Usually, he chastised himself for the mess. Today, it didn't even register. When the microwave's chime rang out, he took the cup back to his bed and turned again to the TV. He clutched the cup as if for warmth, but didn't lift it to take a drink. Peter had been up all night, unable to sleep. It seemed frivolous, disrespectful, even to try. Wilson Fisk had murdered someone he knew, someone he worked with. He killed 11 other people. People with friends and family and children and parents. He targeted that restaurant for a reason. There was no way it could be a coincidence. Maybe Fisk hadn't set that bomb or detonated personally, but it didn't matter. Fisk was going to pay. "Spider-Man is going to pay," someone on the television was saying. A construction worker, it looked like. It was a man-on-the-street interview, and for a final insult, a sign for Fisk's development company was visible in the background. "He can't just run around doing whatever he wants, hurting people and expect to get away with it." They switched to another man, an ice cream vendor in Central Park. He shook his head. "If Spider-Man did it, he should be punished. But I heard the recording. It didn't sound like him." Then the image cut to a woman behind the wheel of a delivery truck. "Wasn't Spider-Man? Guys sounded totally different? Had to be fake." They switched to a panel discussion with J. Jonah Jameson was one of the speakers. They were weighing in on the topic. "Shocker with no history of using bombs." That was a professor who had written a book on supervillains. "He seems fixated on the vibration his devices are able to produce. Based on everything we knew about him, planting a bomb doesn't fit his profile. Perhaps even more mystifying, Spider-Man's behavior was inconsistent with anything we've seen from him before." "His voice was different," another panelist said. It was a woman who was an expert on superhero psychology, though Peter was unsure how someone acquired that expertise. "I think it's worth stating the obvious," she continued. "These people wear costumes that conceal their faces, which means there may be no stable identity behind Spider-Man or the Shocker. Both personas may be inhabited by a number of different performers, if you will. Alternatively, one or both of the people in that restaurant might have been imposters, taking on the role of Shocker or the Spider-Man persona." Another woman, an author, cut in. "I'm not prepared to comment on Shocker, but that was not Spider-Man," she pronounced. "We saw footage of Spider-Man coming to the scene, looking for survivors, because that's what he does. The real Spider-Man is a hero." The screen split between the four panelists and the host, who remained silent. Jameson, who leaned into the camera, and it looked like he wanted to punch it. The television was filled with his image. "We're talking about people who put on masks to terrorize the city," he said loudly, as if to drown the others out by sheer force of will. "Call them heroes or villains. They're all criminals. The heroes are the first responders who risk their lives to help the survivors, policemen and firemen." "Police officers and firefighters, you mean," the author said. "Though you may not be aware, some first responders are women." "You know what I'm saying," Jameson snapped. "Maybe I'm not the most PC guy in the world, but I know the real hero, the ordinary citizens who carry the wounded out of the blast zone. Spider-Man isn't a hero. He's a troublemaker and a fraud. As for his voice, we're talking about a nut who wears a mask and pretends he's a bug. Disguising his voice doesn't mean a damn thing." Peter snapped off the television. He'd had enough. The lab felt like a funeral home. Even Theodore Payton seemed shaken. "This is the most unfortunate day," he said. his voice quiet. Everyone is devastated. Peter nodded. It's just hard to process. Then he looked up and saw two strangers standing by Anika's workstation. They were clearly older, and the man looked astonishingly like a middle-aged male version of Anika. They had to be her parents. He had no idea what he could possibly say to them, but he knew he had to try something. He went over to the workstation and introduced himself. I didn't know her long, he said, but she was smart, funny, and great at what she did. I can't imagine what you're going through, but if there's anything I can do, please let me know. Thank you, Anika's mother said, and then she began to cry. She liked to take risks, her father said. She went skydiving and rock climbing, and we worried terribly about her. But for something like this to happen at an ordinary restaurant, he shook his head. Peter nodded and tried to hold back his own tears. It was impossible to see these grieving parents and not want to do something, but there was nothing to be done. Not now, and not yet. The time would come, though. He would make it happen.